We're back to talk about identity, because it seems to me that this is also part of Chinese history. This term ethnicity, is this an appropriate, should we speak of the Chinese as an ethnic group? Ethnicity is a modern term, many people would argue. It's associated with the ideas of nation states and citizens, and that people are ethnically all of the same kind, and thus they can have a nation state. Does this fit China?
Well, it depends on what you mean by China, but if you mean the People's Republic of China today, by official categories, you can be a Tibetan, a Uyghur, you can be a Han Chinese, you can be a Miao, you can be from Taiwan, Taiwanese, and you are according to the People's Republic, you are all Zhongguoren, all citizens of the People's Republic of China.
You're all Chinese.
That's an official definition. You're all Chinese in the sense of being citizens of the PRC. More complicated is that, of course, more than 90% are what one would call, or what have officially been called, Han Chinese. That is to say, almost defined as being not national minority, as not minority. Because the differences between Han Chinese, so-called Han Chinese, these are all, in political terms, 20th century categories.
In terms of numbers, the population of the People's Republic is now 1.3 billion.
Right, 1.34.
1.34 billion, 1.2 billion are Han Chinese?
About right, yeah.
Oh, wow. So that's...
So, but are defined as Han Chinese. But as you know, being a native of Shandong is not exactly the same as a native of parts of Guangdong.
Right.
There's a lot of mobility around the country, but there's enormous differentiation and diversity also in local dialect between those whom we lump together as Han Chinese. And one of the remarkable feats of the early People's Republic was to follow the Soviet model in identifying the so-called national minorities. Stalin had done so in the Soviet Union, and Mao Zedong believed the need to do so in China. And within a matter of months, I believe it was in 1952, our colleague at Stanford, Tom Mulaney, has researched this very, very well. 56 national minorities were identified, and they remain 56 to this day. Some people, as these ethnographers and sociologists were trying to do this in Yunnan province, trying to figure out what these were, the national minorities or the local peoples didn't know, is it a positive or a negative thing to be a national minority? And that's still a question that one might ask. So it was a very one-time, and now one-time-fits-all approach to defining ethnicity. It's much more complicated than that. If you look back and think of the Taiping Rebellion, think of the so-called the Hakka, the Kejaran,
19th century.
In 19th century, as opposed to what we would today call Han Chinese, who called themselves the Bandiran, the locals. The locals versus the guests. That was one way of differentiating ethnicity.
Okay. So I want to push that back 2,500 years ago, to the time of Confucius, let's say, with the appearance of this notion of the Zhongguo, not in its modern meaning of China, but in this idea of the central states, basically states located in the North China Plain, who defined themselves as having a common civilization. And what was interesting about that was that they were states, right? And they saw themselves as surrounded on the periphery by tribes, tribal peoples.
Right.
And they referred to them, started to refer to them as the Idi, right? So you got this notion of a bifurcation between the Zhongguo, the central states, or the central country, and eventually when it becomes one state, and tribal peoples, Idi, who were not civilized, who didn't live sedentary lives. And in some ways, it strikes me that the modern version of the Han Chinese versus the minority peoples is a little bit like that. That the Han Chinese, predominant group, but these minorities on the periphery, which is where they tend to be, are seen as different but also threatening.
Well, that's a very interesting point of view. It's not one that I think the Chinese government today would agree with, but if you look at how difficult the question of identity can become, if we are all Zhongguoren, according to Beijing, within the realm of China, including now Hong Kong, and from Beijing's point of view, Taiwan, that's a complicated approach to identity, which assumes that ethnicity and nationality really, at the end of the day, go closely together. And that's why for example, some in Taiwan have pushed back on this conception of Chinese unity, this ethnic conception.
So over time, this distinction between the tribal peoples, the Yi and the Zhongguo, the central states, and the people of the central states, gets brought back again and again and again. I have a wonderful passage here from a great statesman of the late 12th, early 13th century, a man named Ye Shi, where he talks about exactly this distinction of what is it that makes the Zhongguo, and the Yi. And I thought we'd invite the participants to read it for themselves and make some comments on what they think it's about.
Idea.